The bridge of the Vanguard hummed with quiet energy, a place of tense silence that contrasted sharply with the chaos in Captain Aria Maxwell's mind. The starship was pristine, its sleek, imposing frame a symbol of humanity's first real claim to the stars. But today, the crew felt the weight of a new reality, one that had been dismissed as a fairy tale for centuries. The time for human myths was over. Aria stood at the command console, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the main view screen. Stars stretched out into the endless dark of space, each one a distant fire, each one a reminder of the vastness they had barely begun to understand. But today, the peaceful void felt stifling. It was as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. A sharp ping from the communications console broke the silence, pulling Aria back to the present. The signal was from the Valharii Empire. Captain, Lieutenant Zane Larkin's voice was strained, his usual calm demeanor tinged with unease. He had served under Aria for years, but this was different. The transmission was official, direct from Praetor Aaron Tharvok himself. "Put it through, Lieutenant," Aria replied, her tone even, betraying none of the dread that gnawed at her insides. On the view screen, the face of Praetor Aaron Tharvok materialized. His features were angular, sharp as a blade. His gray skin shimmered faintly under the lights of his command ship, the Conqueror, a warship that dwarfed anything humanity had built. He was a being of high authority, one whose voice could command fleets with a single word. But today, his gaze carried something else, a sneer. A dismissive mockery. "You must be Captain Maxwell," he said in a deep, resonant voice, his words coated with derision. "The leader of the human ship that thinks it can represent its entire species among the stars." How quaint. The message hit Aria like a slap. The Valharii had always looked at Earth with condescension, calling humanity's rise a fluke or, worse, a distraction. But this was something different. This was a declaration. They didn't fear humanity. They dismissed it. Aria straightened her back, her voice unwavering. "I don't know what your sources have told you, Praetor, but humanity is no fairy tale. We're here, and we're not going anywhere." Tharvok's lips curled into a smile, sharp and cold. "Perhaps not. But in the grand scheme of the galaxy, you are a mere blink. A curiosity. Nothing more. You've sent your ships into the stars, Captain, but your technology, your military, your very presence, is a story written by those who did not understand it." His eyes glinted with cruel amusement. "You will learn, Maxwell, that myths are best left where they belong. In the past." The communication cut abruptly, leaving only the hum of the Vanguard's engines and the weight of his words lingering in the air. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances, the tension palpable. Aria's fingers tightened on the edge of the console. She knew the Valharii had never taken humanity seriously. In the long history of galactic empires, Earth had been nothing more than a footnote, a barely mentioned name in ancient star charts. But this, the dismissal of humanity as irrelevant, as weak, was different. It was a challenge. "Get me the fleet," Aria said, turning to Zane. Her voice remained steady, but the fire in her chest was building. "All of them." "Aye, Captain." Zane's fingers flew across the console, relaying the order to the fleet's commanders scattered across the solar system. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This wasn't just about one ship, one crew. This was about proving that Earth wasn't just a tiny, insignificant, on a galactic map. Humanity was here to stay. Captain, Ensign Lyra Dax, the Vanguard's operations officer, spoke up, her voice laced with concern. "We've detected multiple Valharii ships moving into the system. They're not broadcasting their intentions yet, but the signal matches their signature. This is more than a message." Aria's heart skipped a beat, her instincts sharpening. "They're coming. The invasion starts now." Lyra nodded grimly. "Yes, Captain. It's as though they're making good on their threat." The bridge fell into a quiet buzz of activity. Every officer was already in motion, preparing for the worst. Aria glanced around the room. She knew her crew well, each of them brilliant in their own right, but they were also human, fresh to this vast, complex galaxy. Their experience was limited, their legacy short. But she believed in them. She believed in her. "We'll show them exactly what humanity is made of," Aria said, her voice low, firm. Lieutenant Jace Vell, the Vanguard's chief strategist, tapped his screen with quick precision, bringing up a detailed display of the approaching Valharii fleet. Their numbers were overwhelming, but the size of their ships wasn't the concern. Aria had learned early on that size didn't guarantee success. It was the strategies, the adaptability, the willingness to push forward when others would turn back, that was what won wars. "Captain," Vell said, glancing up. "Their ships are superior in firepower and speed. We're outmatched. But we have one advantage." Aria raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "We're unpredictable. They may underestimate us." She nodded slowly. "That's our edge. We'll make them regret ever thinking we were a myth." The battle that was about to unfold wouldn't be won with sheer force. It would be won with creativity, with audacity, with the very human spirit that had carried Earth through every trial of its short history. They were outclassed in every way except one: their minds. The crew worked furiously to prepare, each member driven by the singular purpose of survival, and something more, a desire to prove that humanity could no longer be ignored. It wasn't about ego or pride, it was about survival. About showing the galaxy that the humans were more than a story. They were real, and they were dangerous. "Helm, set course for the Valharii fleet." "Engage when ready," Aria commanded, stepping toward the forward viewport. Her breath slowed, but the adrenaline was already coursing through her veins. This was where the myth would either die, or it would become history. As the Vanguard accelerated toward the enemy, the stars outside seemed to blur, time stretching into a moment of infinite possibilities. The first shots would be fired soon. And when they did, humanity would no longer be the stuff of fairy tales. It would be a force of its own, ready to write its own story. "Let's make them regret underestimating us," Aria whispered to herself, just loud enough for no one but the stars to hear. The silence of space had never felt so oppressive. On the Vanguard, the crew could feel it, the tension that hung thick in the air, pressing down on them like a physical weight. They were moments away from their first real battle, and no one on the bridge had ever faced anything like this before. The hum of the ship's engines was the only thing that broke the quiet. Aria Maxwell stood before the view screen, her eyes locked on the Valharii fleet now in full view, a massive formation of sleek, monstrous ships that eclipsed the stars behind them. She had faced opponents before, but never like this. The sheer size of the enemy fleet sent a chill through her spine, but she pushed it down. This wasn't the time for fear. She had to be a leader. "Captain," Lieutenant Zane Larkin's voice broke the stillness. "We're reading their main fleet's full power signatures. They're well equipped, armed to the teeth." Aria's jaw tightened. The Valharii weren't here to negotiate or exchange pleasantries, they had come to destroy. "Status on our fleet?" she asked, her voice calm, but beneath it was the unmistakable edge of anticipation. "Deploying all ships, Captain." "But our numbers are small compared to theirs," Larkin replied. "We've got the Cerberus and Vigilant, but none of our vessels have seen combat before. They're untested." "We don't need numbers," Aria said, her eyes scanning the vastness of the screen. "We need to make them doubt their superiority. We hit them where they don't expect us." The crew worked in seamless unison, their faces pale but resolute. Aria's mind raced, calculating every possible outcome. There were no guarantees. The Valharii had centuries of war-fighting experience. The Vanguard was humanity's first real warship, and though it was equipped with experimental technology, it had yet to prove itself in actual battle. "Captain, the Valharii are initiating their first attack," Ensign Lyra Dax said from the operations console, her voice betraying a hint of fear. "We're within range of their weapons. Bring up their fleet formations." "I want to know where we can make our move," Aria ordered, her voice cutting through the rising panic on the bridge. She knew her crew. She knew they were scared, but fear was something they had to push through. The tactical display flickered to life on the main screen, showing the Valharii ships, sleek, deadly, and organized in a perfect formation. They weren't here for a skirmish. They were here to end this quickly. "We've got 5 capital ships in the lead, each bristling with weaponry," Jace Vel, the ship's strategist, said, studying the display. "The smaller vessels are swarming the flanks, but they've left a weak point near their flagship. We might be able to slip through there, hit them hard, and make them reconsider their strategy." Aria didn't hesitate. She had fought too many battles in her career to second-guess her instincts. She tapped the comms panel on her console. "All ships, listen up. We're going to hit them fast, hit them hard, and disappear before they even know what hit them. Follow the vanguard and engage at my mark." There was a moment of stunned silence on the bridge, but then the crew responded. The fleet was with her. They had no choice. They had to make this work. "Engines at full power," Aria said, her voice steady. "Lock on all weapons. Let's show them what humanity is made of." The ship's engines roared to life, pushing the vanguard and its accompanying fleet forward at a breakneck speed. The enemy ships were closing in, their massive guns charging, ready to unleash destruction. But Aria had a plan, a risky one, but one that could turn the tide in their favor. The Valharii would expect a full-on assault. What they wouldn't expect was the quick, surgical strike that Aria had in mind. The vanguard blasted forward, weaving through enemy fire with unrelenting precision, its advanced thrusters burning through the vacuum like a streak of light. The first few volleys of Valharii energy beams missed them entirely, splintering harmlessly against the vacuum of space. "Targeting the rear of their flagship," Aria said, watching as the tactical display highlighted the weak point in the enemy's formation. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her focus. The vanguard closed in on the flagship's vulnerable rear shields, preparing to strike with all the firepower they had. "Captain," Vel's voice came through, strained. "We've got incoming torpedoes from the flank. They're coming in fast." "Countermeasures," Aria barked. "Deploy everything we've got." The ship shook as the first wave of torpedoes struck the vanguard, the shock waves rattling the entire hull. But the vanguard's experimental shields flared to life, absorbing the hits. Aria gritted her teeth. They were holding, for now. But if they couldn't get close enough to land a decisive blow, they'd be sitting ducks. "Adjust course. We're not stopping now," Aria ordered, slamming her fist against the armrest of her chair. The ship veered to the side as another wave of fire narrowly missed them. The vanguard's weapons systems were already locked onto the Valharii flagship's power core. It was a risky strike, but the only shot they had. A few more direct hits, and the Valharii would break through their defenses. "Ready to fire," Lyra called out, her eyes wide as she watched the targeting system. "Weapons are primed, Captain." "Do it," Aria said, her voice ice-cold. The vanguard's main weapons systems flared, releasing a volley of concentrated energy at the weak point in the Valharii flagship's shields. The resulting explosion lit up the blackness of space, a blinding flash that momentarily overwhelmed the view. The ship shuddered with the force of the hit, and for a moment, there was only silence. "Direct hit," Lyra confirmed, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Their shields are down." The Valharii flagship staggered, its energy shields flickering as their core began to destabilize. But it wasn't enough. The Valharii responded with fury. A barrage of enemy fire slammed into the vanguard, sending it careening sideways. The bridge lights flickered, and alarms blared. "Damage report," Aria snapped, gripping the console tightly. "Minor hull damage," Lyra reported, her hands flying over the controls. "We're holding together, but we can't take another hit like that." "We're not done yet," Aria said through gritted teeth. She stared at the tactical display, watching as the Valharii flagship began to limp forward, firing everything it had. "Get us out of here, now!" The vanguard's engines flared again, pulling them away from the wreckage of the battle, but not without losing several more ships in the process. The Valharii were relentless, their firepower almost overwhelming, but they were now on the defensive. Humanity had struck a blow they hadn't expected. As the vanguard pulled back, Aria allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. They'd survived their first battle, but at what cost? They had proven their worth, but they had only just begun to understand what it would take to survive in the galaxy. The war had just begun. "Status report on the fleet," she asked, turning toward her crew. "Survivors are on course for the rendezvous point," Zane replied, his voice steady now. "But the Valharii are regrouping. They'll be back, and next time, they'll come harder." Aria looked out at the stars. She had made the right call, but the real war was still ahead. "Then we'll be ready," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't over yet." The vanguard drifted in the dark of space, silent but for the hum of its systems. The battle had ended, at least, for now, but the crew felt the weight of the aftermath pressing down on them. They had survived their first confrontation with the Valharii, but the cost was steep. The fleet had been reduced to a handful of ships, and their supplies were running low. More importantly, the Valharii were not the type to let a challenge go unanswered. Aria Maxwell stood in the command center, staring out at the expanse of stars that stretched endlessly before them. The soft glow of distant suns provided little comfort. Her mind was still racing, thinking through the tactics, the decisions, the moments when everything could have gone wrong. It was a quiet kind of chaos, the aftermath of a fight that had been only the beginning. "Captain, we've received a transmission from command," Lyra Dax said, her voice calm but laced with concern. "They're requesting a status update on the fleet." Aria turned from the viewport, her eyes narrowing as she considered the message. The higher-ups back on Earth had been expecting a different kind of report. A victorious one. But Aria knew better. This wasn't a win, not yet. "Send them a response," Aria said, her voice flat. "Tell them we've survived, but we're not out of danger yet." Lyra nodded and began composing the message, her fingers tapping out the words quickly. Aria had only moments before the next decision would need to be made. The Valharii would come again. And when they did, they would bring everything they had. A sharp ping from the tactical console caught her attention. Lieutenant Zane Larkin's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. "Captain," he began, his voice tight, "we've detected a Valharii pursuit fleet. It's small for now, but it's closing in fast. They've adapted to our tactics." Aria's heart skipped. They had assumed the Valharii would retreat after the first skirmish, regroup and lick their wounds. Clearly, they were wrong. "How fast?" she demanded. "Within 20 hours, Zane replied, his eyes scanning the data rapidly. "They've modified their tactics, Captain. It's a smaller, faster fleet. I'm not sure we can outrun them this time." The room fell silent as everyone processed the news. The vanguard wasn't fast enough to escape. The other ships in their fleet had even less hope of outrunning the Valharii's superior ships. They would have to fight again, but this time, the odds were stacked against them in every way. Aria turned sharply on her heel, her gaze sweeping the bridge. The faces of her crew were set with determination, but it was clear that the fear of a near-certain defeat was creeping in. The Valharii were relentless, and the damage from the previous battle still echoed in their systems. "What are our options?" Aria asked, keeping her tone even. Jace Vell, the ship's strategist, stepped forward, his face etched with concentration. "We have one option: we stand and fight. Our best chance is to use the element of surprise again, hit them before they realize what we're doing. But it won't work twice if we don't make it count. We can't afford a prolonged engagement." Aria nodded, her fingers tapping the console. "How do we even the odds?" "They've got more firepower and superior tactics." Zane spoke up again, his voice steady. "It's not about firepower anymore. We need to disrupt their coordination. If we can break their fleet's cohesion, we can take down their flagship and cripple their command structure. That will cause confusion and give us the opening we need." Aria's eyes narrowed. "And how do we do that?" Jace's expression hardened. "We need to get close, closer than we ever have. Get inside their formation and target their communication relays. If we can blind their commanders, the smaller ships will be unable to coordinate. We'll only get one shot at this, but it's the best shot we have. Aria paced in front of the command station, weighing their options. It was a risky plan, dangerously so. There was no margin for error. But it was the only one they had left. And Aria knew that if they didn't act quickly, the Valharii would grind them into dust. Humanity's presence in the galaxy would be snuffed out before it even had the chance to grow. "All right," Aria said, finally. Her voice was firm, unwavering. "We'll execute the plan. Zane, get our fleet into position. Jace, coordinate with our engineers. We need to make sure the Vanguard systems are running at full capacity. We can't afford any more malfunctions." The crew sprang into action. Aria's mind was racing with scenarios, each one darker than the last. But there was no room for fear. Not now. She had led them into the unknown once before, and she would do it again. Hours later, the Vanguard was moving at full speed toward the approaching Valharii fleet. The crew was tense, every moment a countdown to the inevitable clash. Aria stood once more at the front of the bridge, her hand gripping the railing as she watched the formation of enemy ships grow larger on the screen. "Captain," Zane said, his voice taut. "We're entering range. They haven't noticed us yet. We're close enough to make a strike." Aria's eyes never left the screen. "Target their communications relay. On my mark, fire everything we have at it." The crew waited, breathless. The Vanguard's weapon systems were primed, and the tension in the air was thick. Every person on this ship knew that the fate of humanity rested on this moment. "Mark," Aria said, her voice calm but resolute. The Vanguard's cannons erupted in a blaze of fire, sending a concentrated stream of energy directly at the Valharii fleet's command ship. The blast hit its target, striking the communication array with deadly precision. For a brief moment, there was only the eerie silence of space as the enemy flagship's shields flickered, then failed. "Direct hit," Lyra shouted from the operations console. "They're blind. We've crippled their command center." The Valharii flagship staggered, momentarily disoriented. The smaller ships around it began to break formation, firing blindly at anything that moved. The chaos they had hoped for was here. But the Valharii were quick to adapt. Their flagship began to retaliate, launching waves of deadly torpedoes at the Vanguard. "Brace for impact," Aria shouted, her grip tightening on the console as the ship shook violently. The Vanguard lurched under the force of the first wave of fire, but their shields held strong, absorbing the brunt of the damage. "We've got them on the ropes," Zane said, his voice tight with excitement. "If we can hold them for another few minutes, the rest of our fleet can land the finishing blow." Aria didn't respond. There was no time for words now. The Vanguard dove back into the fray, her weapons lighting up the darkness as the battle raged around them. The Valharii were desperate, fighting back with everything they had, but humanity had proved its mettle. The odds were no longer as stacked against them. And then, as the Vanguard soared toward the enemy flagship, Aria allowed herself a brief, fleeting thought: humanity had just delivered a message the galaxy would never forget. But the fight was far from over. The war had just begun.